On June 4, 2024, Russian forces launched a major offensive, sending mechanized infantry and tank columns charging toward Ukrainian-held territory. What seemed like a textbook military advance quickly turned into a technological disaster for Russia. Ukrainian drones, once underestimated, became the deciding factor in this battle. As tanks were shredded and armored vehicles disabled, the entire Russian assault unraveled before it could even gain momentum. In the wake of this unexpected collapse, one question remains. How did Ukraine's drones and cutting-edge tactics shatter what was supposed to be an unstoppable Russian force? This article unpacks the critical moments of the offensive and reveals how modern warfare is being reshaped by unexpected players on the battlefield. On June 4, 2024, Russian forces launched a major assault, moving into Ukrainian-controlled territory with a coordinated attack involving tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry. Their strategy was straightforward: an overwhelming use of mechanized units designed to break through Ukraine's defenses and seize vital territory quickly. The long column of T-90 tanks, BMP-3, infantry fighting vehicles, and other armored units advanced toward residential areas with one clear goal: capturing ground that Ukraine had long held. The plan was simple: drive through, overpower resistance, and establish a foothold in the heart of Ukrainian territory. Russia's traditional approach to warfare was built on the principle of brute force, relying on their vast array of tanks and armored vehicles to crush any opposition in their path. Historically, this method had worked well for them, especially when facing less equipped forces. The Russian military was used to overwhelming its enemies with sheer numbers and firepower, and it was assumed that Ukraine, with its smaller army and relatively limited resources, would not be able to stop them. The advance seemed unstoppable at first, as tanks rolled forward, engines roaring and turret guns aimed at their targets. However, this time, something was different. The Russian column did not move unnoticed. As the armored vehicles advanced, Ukrainian forces, well aware of the looming threat, had already set up a sophisticated network of surveillance drones. These drones were part of Ukraine's strategy to counter Russia's heavy mechanized forces. Using high-tech UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, Ukrainian forces were able to monitor the movement of Russian units in real time, pinpointing their locations and tracking their every move. The drones provided an almost unbroken watch over the Russian advance, giving Ukrainian commanders a precise picture of where the attack was coming from and how it was unfolding. What Russia didn't anticipate was how big of a game-changer these drones would become. Instead of relying solely on traditional defense strategies, Ukraine used its drone advantage to disrupt the Russian assault from the skies. The initial stages of the attack went according to Russia's plan, with their vehicles closing in on Ukrainian positions. But as the tanks and armored vehicles pressed forward, they were met with a new type of resistance: Ukrainian FPV, first-person view, drones. These drones, launched from the ground, quickly became a nightmare for Russian forces. The FPV drones, small but deadly, were designed to deliver precision strikes on the most vulnerable parts of Russian tanks and armored vehicles. The moment a tank was detected by the Ukrainian surveillance drones, the FPV operators moved in for the kill. The first strike was swift. A Ukrainian FPV drone slammed into the lead Russian tank, hitting it directly. The blast caused significant damage, but the vehicle kept moving forward, seemingly undeterred. However, the damage wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The tank, now slower and less effective, was no longer a threatening force. And just like that, the overwhelming might of Russia's tank column began to show signs of faltering. As the assault continued, more Ukrainian FPV drones were launched, each one finding its mark and causing additional damage. The Russian tanks, now targeted by multiple drones, started to lose their speed and effectiveness. With each hit, the tanks' protective armor weakened, and their ability to continue the advance was compromised. However, despite the mounting damage, some of the Russian vehicles continued to push forward, hoping to break through Ukraine's defenses. But this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem for Russia. As more tanks were hit, many of the crews began to abandon their vehicles, realizing that they were no longer viable for the fight. Some tanks were left behind on the battlefield, while others, too damaged to move, became targets for Ukrainian FPV drones. The drones continued to strike, diving in to destroy Russian vehicles from the inside, where traditional defenses couldn't protect them. The once imposing Russian assault had been paralyzed by the relentless attacks from above. Russia's mechanized assault, which had initially appeared so promising, was quickly becoming a disaster. The reliance on tanks and armored vehicles, so integral to Russia's military tactics, was proving ineffective against the new technology that Ukraine had brought to the battlefield. The battle had only just begun, but the signs were clear. This wouldn't be like any other traditional fight Russia had ever won. What started as an overwhelming attack was rapidly turning into a humiliating setback thanks to an unexpected and seemingly unstoppable force: drones. As Russia's tank column moved deeper into Ukrainian territory, they encountered an unexpected obstacle that would soon change the course of the battle. Ukrainian drone operators, prepared for this very moment, launched their first wave of first-person view FPV drones. These drones, small yet deadly, were equipped with high-explosive payloads, capable of delivering devastating precision strikes to the heart of Russia's mechanized forces. Within minutes, the lead tanks of the Russian column were targeted and struck, marking the beginning of a dramatic shift in the battlefield. FPV drones are designed for one primary purpose: precision. Unlike traditional airstrikes or artillery, these drones allow operators to see directly through their cameras as they guide them to their targets. The strikes were fast and powerful, hitting the tanks in critical spots where their armor was weakest. The first few hits left the tanks visibly damaged, but some still managed to push forward, attempting to continue their advance. However, the damage was already done. The drones had stripped away layers of armor and left the vehicles severely impaired, making it difficult for them to maintain their speed or firepower. These FPV drones were not just effective. They were also a psychological weapon. Russian tank crews, used to charging into battle with little fear of significant damage, now found themselves vulnerable to an enemy they couldn't see. The constant threat of a drone strike, with no clear way of stopping it, began to shake the morale of the Russian forces. As each tank took a hit, the realization grew that their traditional tactics of overwhelming force were no longer enough. The fear of being targeted by a drone from above added an additional layer of stress for the Russian soldiers, who now had to contend with not just Ukrainian ground forces, but an invisible enemy in the sky. This shift in dynamics wasn't just about the physical damage the drones caused. It was about the disruption they brought to Russia's carefully coordinated attack. The tanks, which were supposed to be the spearhead of Russia's offensive, were now struggling to move forward effectively. The lead vehicles, stripped of their armor and with their mobility compromised, could no longer continue the charge. The once formidable Russian column began to lose its cohesion, with the tanks unable to maintain formation or cover each other as they advanced. In addition to their precision, Ukrainian FPV drones also disrupted the command and communication structure of the Russian forces. The drones targeted not only tanks, but also the vehicles responsible for coordinating the attack, creating confusion within the ranks. Russian commanders, who relied heavily on their armored vehicles to maintain control and direction, found themselves without the tools they needed to direct their forces effectively. This breakdown in coordination became a major factor in the subsequent failure of the Russian assault. As the drones continued their assault, Ukrainian operators displayed tactical brilliance. They knew exactly when to strike and where to focus their attacks. By carefully targeting the most vulnerable vehicles at the front of the column, they forced Russia to commit more resources to protect their tanks, weakening their ability to concentrate their firepower and advance. Each hit from the FPV drones further depleted Russia's offensive capabilities, slowing their advance and forcing them into a defensive posture. The Ukrainian drone operators, though vastly outnumbered by Russian forces, had turned the tide of battle in a way that few could have predicted. The drones' ability to disrupt Russia's mechanized force, both physically and psychologically, highlighted a new era in warfare. As Russian forces pushed forward, they soon realized that their technological superiority in armored vehicles meant little in the face of such precise and relentless drone strikes. In conclusion, the role of Ukrainian drones in this battle was not just one of damage, but also disruption. The precision strikes, the psychological impact on Russian forces, and the tactical brilliance of the drone operators all combined to create a formidable defense that Russia simply could not overcome. The situation, which had initially seemed to favor Russia's overwhelming force, quickly turned against them as the drones played a pivotal role in halting their advance. Yet, even as Russian forces pushed forward, the situation only worsened. With each successive wave of drone attacks, the Russian assault began to collapse, revealing the full power of modern technology in reshaping the future of warfare. As the Russian assault continued, the consequences of Ukraine's drone strikes became undeniable. The first wave of Russia's attack, initially so promising, began to crumble when their tanks started taking hit after hit from Ukrainian FPV drones. These drones, small but powerful, expertly targeted the vulnerable spots of the Russian tanks. The damage was significant, and as more tanks were hit, Russian crews realized their vehicles were no longer fit for battle. One by one, the crews abandoned their tanks, unable to continue the advance. What had started as a powerful push soon turned into a disorganized retreat, with Russian soldiers scrambling to leave behind their damaged vehicles. But even in the face of such devastation, Russia didn't retreat entirely. Instead, they decided to press forward with a new wave of infantry fighting vehicles, specifically the BMP-3. These heavily armored vehicles were intended to restore some of the momentum lost by the tanks. But this shift in strategy did little to change the outcome. The Ukrainian response was swift and precise. As soon as the BMP-3s entered the fray, they were targeted by a combination of drones, artillery, and anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs, further crippling Russia's already weakening position. The BMP-3, despite being heavily armored and designed for close support, proved to be no match for the Ukrainian forces. The precision of the Ukrainian drones, combined with the devastating power of artillery and the accuracy of javelin missiles, rendered the BMP-3s almost useless. Each new wave of Russian vehicles was met with calculated destruction. The vehicle's armor couldn't withstand the repeated strikes, and many were immobilized or destroyed within minutes of entering the battlefield. The Russian forces, which had hoped the BMP-3s would help stabilize the assault, found themselves facing yet another defeat. As Russia's armored vehicles were neutralized, the infantry that followed was left exposed. Without the protection of their tanks and fighting vehicles, Russian infantry units quickly became disorganized. The once coordinated attack turned into a chaotic retreat, as soldiers scattered in every direction trying to find cover. But there was no escape from the precision of Ukraine's drone strikes and artillery fire. The battlefield, which had once been a place of planned assault and heavy momentum for Russia, now became a trap where every move was watched, calculated, and attacked by Ukrainian forces. This section explores why Russia's first wave collapsed so rapidly. The decision to rely heavily on armored vehicles like tanks and BMP-3s proved to be a costly mistake. While Russia's mechanized units are generally powerful, they were no match for the Ukrainian drone forces, which exploited the weaknesses in the Russian vehicles' defenses. The drones were able to neutralize Russia's key advantage in the form of armored units, and once these vehicles were taken out of the equation, Russia's infantry was left vulnerable. Additionally, the psychological impact on the Russian soldiers cannot be ignored. In previous conflicts, Russian forces had been able to rely on their overwhelming firepower to crush opposition. However, in this case, the constant threat from above, unseen drones delivering precise strikes, created an atmosphere of fear and confusion among the Russian ranks. The loss of coordination, the abandonment of their tanks, and the failure of their BMP-3s all signaled a breakdown in Russia's first wave of attack. The collapse of the first wave marked a turning point in the battle. Russia's strategy, which had initially seemed sound, had quickly unraveled. The overwhelming force they had hoped to use to push through Ukrainian defenses was effectively neutralized by technology and precision tactics that Russia had not anticipated. Instead of retreating and regrouping, Russia made the fatal mistake of sending in more mechanized forces, hoping that sheer numbers could turn the tide. But each new wave was met with the same fate as the first: quick destruction and disarray. As Russian forces attempted to regroup and reorganize after their devastating losses, Ukraine's countermeasures were already in full effect. Despite the chaos on the battlefield, Ukrainian forces were far from passive. They had anticipated Russia's next moves, and their ability to adapt quickly to shifting circumstances played a crucial role in preventing Russia from regaining momentum. Ukrainian artillery, guided by real-time data from UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, began targeting Russian vehicles and infantry with pinpoint precision, further weakening the Russian assault. The effectiveness of these countermeasures can be attributed to the integration of multiple technological systems working in unison. Ukrainian UAVs, which had been tracking Russian movements from the start of the battle, provided continuous, up-to-the-minute targeting data for artillery units. These drones were able to identify weak points in the Russian formation, helping Ukrainian forces to strike with deadly accuracy. Russian armored vehicles and artillery units, once thought to be nearly invulnerable, were now being targeted by Ukrainian forces from multiple directions. One of the most significant weapons in Ukraine's arsenal was the Javelin anti-tank missile, which proved to be a game-changer in the battle. Unlike traditional tank artillery, which relies on direct fire, the Javelin missile is guided by infrared targeting and is capable of hitting enemy vehicles from above, targeting the weaker top armor. Ukraine used UAVs to guide these missiles, ensuring that each strike was lethal and precise. The Javelin's effectiveness was clear. Russian BMP-3 vehicles, which were supposed to provide much-needed support for the infantry, were crippled by well-placed strikes. These vehicles, heavily armored and designed for direct combat, were no match for the combination of drone surveillance and Javelin missile strikes. The role of long-range FPV drones was also vital in maintaining the pressure on Russia's forces. These drones, while small, are equipped with high explosive payloads and are capable of sustained flights, giving them the ability to track and engage targets for long periods. Ukrainian FPV drone operators worked in close coordination with artillery and Javelin missile teams, creating a nearly unstoppable attack chain. As soon as Russian vehicles were identified by the UAVs, FPV drones were launched to make the initial strike, followed by artillery barrages and Javelin missiles that finished off any remaining threats. This combination of high-tech tools and coordinated tactics made it nearly impossible for Russian forces to regroup or gain any traction. Russia's attempts to re-establish control over the battlefield were thwarted at every turn. The Ukrainian counterattack was relentless, leaving Russian armored vehicles unable to advance without facing devastating losses. The psychological toll on the Russian troops also cannot be underestimated. Having been bombarded from the air and the ground with near-perfect precision, Russian soldiers had no clear way to counter the multi-layered assault. Even their BMP-3 vehicles, which were supposed to shield infantry, became sitting ducks for Ukrainian drones and missiles. At the same time, Ukrainian artillery continued to strike key Russian positions, using the data provided by the UAVs to adjust their fire with extreme accuracy. These long-range artillery strikes were not only physically damaging, but also forced Russia to continually adapt and retreat, further disrupting their plans. Russian units, already on edge from the losses inflicted by drones, were now facing constant pressure from artillery shells, which seemed to come from every direction. Highlights the profound impact of combining UAVs, artillery, and anti-tank missiles. The precision targeting capabilities of these systems created a nearly impenetrable defense for Ukraine. While Russia's forces attempted to regroup and push forward, they were met with one devastating blow after another. The fact that these attacks were coordinated so efficiently and effectively meant that Russia could not get back on track, and their offensive faltered as a result. As the battle moved into urban areas, the dynamics of the conflict changed dramatically. The vast open fields and wide roads that favored Russia's mechanized forces were replaced by narrow streets, dense buildings, and tight corners that forced both sides to adapt quickly. Ukrainian forces, now reinforced with Western-supplied vehicles like the Bradley fighting vehicle and Humvees, used these assets to their advantage, conducting swift maneuvers and carefully planned counterattacks in the close-quarters environment of residential zones. These vehicles, equipped with advanced firepower and armored protection, were perfect for urban warfare, allowing Ukrainian troops to move quickly, clear buildings, and strike at Russian positions with precision. On the other side, Russian forces attempted to push through the residential zones with the same heavy mechanized units that had initially failed them. However, as the battle transitioned to urban environments, the limitations of Russia's strategy became clear. Despite their attempts to use drones and FPV, first-person view, drones to target Ukrainian positions, the narrow streets and congested areas made it difficult for them to maneuver. Russian tanks, BMP-3s, and infantry faced increased difficulty in coordinating their attacks as the urban terrain slowed their movement and limited their line of sight. In contrast, Ukrainian forces had already adapted to this shift. With the support of Western vehicles, they were able to maneuver more easily in the tight spaces. The Bradley fighting vehicle, known for its mobility and powerful weapon systems, played a key role in counterattacking and clearing enemy positions. These vehicles allowed Ukrainian infantry to stay protected while advancing quickly through streets, using the vehicle's firepower to destroy Russian positions with pinpoint accuracy. Humvees, although lighter, provided vital support for these infantry units, transporting troops efficiently while also offering firepower to cover their movements. The use of Western vehicles in urban combat was a significant advantage for Ukraine. These vehicles were not only well-suited for urban warfare, but they also served as a symbol of international support, demonstrating Ukraine's ability to coordinate with its allies. This added dimension of Western technology helped level the playing field, giving Ukrainian forces the edge they needed to fight back effectively. As the conflict raged on in the urban areas, both sides adapted their tactics to the challenges of close-quarters combat. Russian forces, recognizing the difficulty of advancing with their large vehicles, began using drones more frequently. FPV drones, which had been successful in targeting Ukrainian tanks earlier in the battle, were now employed to target individual Ukrainian soldiers, supply lines, and armored vehicles. However, the dense urban terrain proved to be just as much of a disadvantage for Russian drones as it was for their vehicles. The presence of buildings, alleyways, and tight corners made it hard for drones to maintain a clear line of sight, limiting their effectiveness. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces used the terrain to their advantage. Urban environments allowed them to be more unpredictable and harder to target. Ukrainian infantry units, working alongside their armored vehicles, engaged in carefully coordinated attacks. They cleared buildings methodically, using the Western vehicles as mobile support to neutralize Russian forces hiding in homes or behind barricades. These tactics were highly effective in reducing Russia's ability to hold ground. And with each successful counterattack, Ukrainian forces regained more territory. Urban warfare also required a shift in communication and coordination. Both sides had to adapt to the new realities of fighting in close quarters. While Russia struggled to adapt their larger, more cumbersome forces to the urban environment, Ukrainian forces were able to use their smaller, more mobile units in combination with their vehicles to create a more fluid and responsive defense. The ability to strike swiftly, clear enemy positions, and then regroup quickly became a hallmark of Ukrainian tactics. The Russian offensive, once filled with confidence, finally crumbled under the weight of Ukrainian resistance. Despite sending in more BMP-3s and infantry, the Russian forces couldn't overcome the relentless attacks from Ukraine's drones, artillery, and precision missiles. Each attempt to regroup was met with swift, coordinated counterattacks that neutralized Russia's remaining vehicles. As tanks were destroyed, infantry scattered, and command broke down, the Russians had no choice but to retreat. The assault, which had started with such promise, ended in complete failure. The outcome was clear. Russia's reliance on traditional tactics and heavy mechanized units couldn't stand up to modern warfare's technological edge. Ukraine's use of drones and advanced weaponry showed just how vulnerable even the most powerful armies can be when they fail to adapt. If you want more in-depth analysis on military strategies and current conflicts, subscribe to Military Force and stay updated with the latest breakdowns of critical battles.